She went in for a checkup, but ultrasound reveals the most babies ever seen. Would the babies survive, and would she? To find out more, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel to get more of my stories. The faint hum of fluorescent lights echoed in the quiet hospital room, a stark contrast to the opulence Veronica Sterling was accustomed to. She clutched her Chanel bag tightly, the soft leather creasing beneath her trembling fingers. She had always been a woman of control, commanding boardrooms and charity galas alike with effortless poise. But here, in this sterile environment, she felt exposed, vulnerable. Dr. Celia Harper, a poised woman with silver-threaded hair and a calming presence, stepped into the room, clutching a clipboard. Her white coat swished slightly as she moved, her professional smile genuine but tinged with curiosity. Veronica had seen that look countless times. To many, she was still the Widow Sterling, a title whispered in hushed tones since her husband's tragic passing 3 months ago. The world admired her strength, but no one saw the cracks forming beneath her polished exterior. "Mrs. Sterling," Dr. Harper began, her voice warm and soothing. "I appreciate your patience. Shall we get started?" Veronica nodded, her throat too tight to form words. The past few months had been a whirlwind of grief and uncertainty, but today she focused on the one piece of hope she still clung to, the child she carried. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, a gesture as instinctive as breathing. As Dr. Harper guided her into the adjoining examination room, Veronica couldn't shake the flickering doubts in her mind. Her pregnancy had been a surprise, revealed just weeks after the funeral. It had been a bittersweet revelation, her late husband Julian's final gift to her. She wanted to believe it was a sign that she could still have a piece of him, but every step of this pregnancy felt fraught with complications and unanswered questions. The examination room was sterile and bright, the ultrasound machine positioned near a reclining chair. Dr. Harper motioned for Veronica to lie back as a nurse entered, setting up the equipment with practiced efficiency. "How have you been feeling?" Dr. Harper asked, her tone casual as she prepared the gel. "Any unusual symptoms?" Veronica hesitated. "I've been tired, more than I expected, and nauseous. It comes in waves, but it's worse at night." Dr. Harper nodded thoughtfully. "That's not unusual, especially in the first trimester. We'll take a closer look today and see how everything's progressing." Veronica braced herself as the cool gel touched her skin. She stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles to distract herself from the unease gnawing at her. This wasn't her first ultrasound, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the loneliness. Julian should have been here, holding her hand, whispering reassurances. Instead, she faced this alone, her grief still a raw wound beneath her poised exterior. As the probe glided across her abdomen, the monitor flickered to life. Dr. Harper's expression, calm and composed moments ago, shifted ever so slightly. Her brow furrowed, and she leaned closer to the screen. Veronica's heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong?" Dr. Harper didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the monitor intently. The nurse standing beside her exchanged a glance with the doctor, her composure slipping into faint surprise. "Dr. Harper?" Veronica's voice wavered. The tension in the room was suffocating. The doctor straightened, her expression carefully neutral, though her voice held an edge of awe. "Veronica, I need you to remain calm, but what I'm seeing here is remarkable." "What do you mean?" Veronica's pulse quickened. The room felt suddenly too small, the bright lights too harsh. Dr. Harper turned the monitor slightly, pointing at the screen. "You're not just carrying one baby. There are several, more than I've ever seen in a single pregnancy." Veronica's breath caught. "Several? How many?" Dr. Harper hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. "It appears you're carrying at least 8, possibly more. We'll need further imaging to confirm." 8. The word echoed in Veronica's mind, a thunderous drumbeat against her racing thoughts. It was impossible, unimaginable. She felt her world tilt on its axis, the gravity of the revelation pressing down on her chest. "How?" she whispered, barely able to form the question, "How is that even possible?" Dr. Harper placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's rare, but it can happen. Multiple pregnancies like this often result from fertility treatments, but in some cases, nature surprises us. What's important now is ensuring your health and the health of these babies. It's going to be a challenging journey, Veronica." Challenging didn't begin to cover it. Veronica stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her ears. 8 lives, each one connected to her, to Julian. She wanted to feel joy, gratitude, something other than the overwhelming tide of fear and uncertainty. How would she manage? What would this mean for her already fragile health? And what if something went wrong? "Veronica," Dr. Harper's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you're in good hands. We'll monitor you closely and develop a plan together. You're not alone in this." Veronica nodded mechanically, though the weight of the moment felt unbearable. Alone. That word stung the most. She thought of Julian again, his reassuring presence, the way he'd always known how to steady her in moments of doubt. How was she supposed to navigate this without him? As the ultrasound continued, Veronica forced herself to focus on the faint flickers of movement on the screen, each one a tiny heartbeat, a fragile thread of life. She didn't know how she would face the road ahead, but one thing was certain. Nothing about her life would ever be the same. As the minutes dragged on, Veronica remained silent, her mind trapped in a whirlwind of questions and fears. Dr. Harper continued the ultrasound, her movements steady but careful, as if she too felt the weight of the situation. "I'll be honest with you," Dr. Harper began, her voice breaking the tense silence. "A pregnancy like this is unprecedented in my career. It comes with significant risks, both for you and the babies. We'll need to proceed with extreme caution." "What kind of risks?" Veronica managed to ask, though her voice sounded far away, almost detached from her body. Dr. Harper adjusted the probe slightly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "There's a high likelihood of preterm labor. With this many babies, your body will face enormous strain. Gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and even organ failure are serious possibilities. And even with the best medical care, it's unlikely that all the babies will survive. The odds aren't in our favor." Veronica's stomach churned at the words. She was no stranger to calculated risks, in business, in philanthropy, even in her personal life. But this was different. This wasn't about numbers or probabilities. This was about life. 8 fragile, miraculous lives growing inside her. She swallowed hard, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "What are our options?" Dr. Harper hesitated, the lines on her face deepening. "We'll need to make some decisions moving forward. Selective reduction is one possibility. It would increase the chances of survival for the remaining babies and reduce the strain on your body." Selective reduction. The term felt clinical, almost sterile, but the implications hit her like a sledgehammer. The idea of choosing which lives to save and which to let go was unthinkable. She couldn't fathom making such a choice, not when each heartbeat on the screen represented a piece of Julian, a piece of the life they had dreamed of building together. "No," she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I won't do that. I'll fight for all of them." Dr. Harper studied her carefully, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. "It's a brave decision, Veronica, but you need to prepare yourself. This journey will test you in ways you can't imagine." Veronica nodded, though the enormity of the challenge ahead felt crushing. She had faced adversity before, losing Julian, enduring the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. But this was different. This was a fight for survival, not just for her, but for her children. The rest of the appointment passed in a blur. Dr. Harper discussed a detailed plan for monitoring her pregnancy, emphasizing the importance of frequent checkups and a team of specialists who would oversee her care. Veronica listened intently, absorbing the information like a lifeline. Each step felt daunting, but it also gave her a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. As she left the hospital, the reality of her situation began to sink in. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but so did a flicker of determination. Julian had always admired her resilience, her ability to rise above challenges. She could almost hear his voice now, urging her to stay strong. The drive home was quiet, the luxury sedan gliding through the bustling streets of the city. Veronica stared out the window, her mind replaying the image of the ultrasound screen. 8 tiny lives, each one a miracle. She thought of the nursery she and Julian had planned, the soft pastel colors and antique furniture they had carefully selected. It felt so long ago, a dream from a different lifetime. When she arrived at the Sterling estate, the staff greeted her with their usual deference, their expressions betraying none of the pity she knew they felt. She made her way to her bedroom, the cavernous space feeling emptier than ever without Julian's presence. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she placed both hands on her stomach, her palms warm against the cool silk of her blouse. "You're all I have now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I promise, I'll do everything I can to protect you." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of appointments and preparations. Veronica's medical team expanded to include specialists in high-risk pregnancies, neonatal care, and even a nutritionist who crafted a meticulous diet to support her and the babies. The media began to speculate about her reclusive behavior, but Veronica ignored the headlines, focusing instead on the battle she faced. Her body began to change rapidly, the strain of carrying 8 lives becoming more apparent with each passing day. She woke each morning to new aches and pains, her once effortless movements now slow and deliberate. But the hardest part wasn't the physical toll, it was the constant fear. Every twinge, every cramp felt like a warning sign, a reminder of how fragile this pregnancy truly was. One night, as she sat alone in the nursery, her phone buzzed on the nearby table. She glanced at the screen, her heart sinking as she recognized the name. Cynthia Blake, her late husband's sister. They hadn't spoken much since Julian's death, their relationship strained by years of subtle rivalry and unspoken resentment. With a sigh, Veronica answered. "Cynthia." "Veronica," came the cool, clipped tone on the other end. "I just heard something about your pregnancy. Is it true?" Veronica's grip on the phone tightened. "What exactly have you heard?" "That you're carrying multiples. More than just twins or triplets," Cynthia said, her voice laced with skepticism. "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" Anger flared in Veronica's chest, hot and immediate. "I don't have time for your accusations, Cynthia. This isn't about you or the Sterling name, it's about my children." "Your children," Cynthia repeated, her tone softening slightly. "Do you even realize what you're getting yourself into? The risks, the complications?" "I'm well aware," Veronica interrupted sharply, "and I don't need your concern, feigned or otherwise." The line went silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Finally, Cynthia spoke again, her voice quieter. "Julian would have wanted you to be safe, Veronica. Just think about that." The call ended abruptly, leaving Veronica staring at the screen. She knew Cynthia's words were meant to wound, but they also struck a chord. Julian would have wanted her to be safe, but he also would have trusted her to make the right decisions, for herself and their family. As she set the phone down, Veronica felt a renewed sense of determination. She had made her choice, and she would see it through, no matter what. This wasn't just about survival, it was about legacy, love, and the promise of a future she was determined to fight for. The weeks turned into months, and the weight of Veronica's decision bore down on her more heavily with each passing day. The media frenzy she had tried to avoid finally caught up with her. News outlets speculated wildly about her condition, claiming everything from medical miracles to conspiracy theories about secret fertility treatments. Her estate became a fortress, with security patrolling the gates to keep paparazzi at bay. Inside, the chaos outside felt distant, but the challenges were all too real. Veronica's body ached constantly, her once graceful stride now a slow shuffle. The staff moved around her with a reverent caution, their usual brisk efficiency tempered by concern. Despite their best efforts to maintain normalcy, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Her medical team visited almost daily now, monitoring her vitals and the growth of the babies with meticulous care. Each ultrasound brought a mix of relief and anxiety. Some days, all 8 heartbeats were strong, their tiny forms wriggling on the screen. Other days, Dr. Harper's silence spoke louder than words. Baby 6 isn't growing as quickly as the others, Dr. Harper said during one particularly tense checkup, her tone measured but serious. We're keeping an eye on it, but the strain of sharing resources with so many siblings is taking a toll. Veronica clenched her hands together, her nails digging into her palms. She refused to cry, not in front of the team that looked to her for strength. What can we do? We're already doing everything possible, Dr. Harper replied gently. The rest is up to nature, and your body. Her body. It was a phrase Veronica had come to resent. She felt like a vessel, her own needs secondary to the lives growing within her. Every meal, every sip of water, every moment of rest was meticulously calculated to maximize the baby's chances. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, there was always the looming specter of loss. One evening, Veronica found herself in the nursery again. The room was still incomplete, a mix of scattered furniture and unopened boxes. She ran her fingers along the edge of a crib Julian had picked out, his excitement palpable even in her memory. I wanted 6 kids, he had confessed one night, his voice warm with uncharacteristic vulnerability. A big, chaotic family, enough to fill this house with laughter. Veronica smiled at the memory, but it quickly gave way to a pang of grief. 6. They had joked about how ambitious that number was, teasing each other about who would handle midnight feedings and diaper changes. Now, she was carrying 8, and he wasn't here to share in the joy or the burden. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Danvers, her housekeeper, holding a tray with tea and biscuits. You need to eat something, ma'am, Mrs. Danvers said, her stern tone softened by the worry in her eyes. Veronica shook her head. I'm not hungry. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, you don't have the luxury of skipping meals, Mrs. Danvers replied, setting the tray down firmly. Those babies are counting on you. It was a familiar refrain, but this time it struck a nerve. Veronica nodded, picking up the cup with trembling hands. Thank you, Danvers. The older woman hesitated, then reached out to touch Veronica's shoulder lightly. You're doing more than anyone could ask of you. Julian would be proud. The mention of his name brought tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. At 28 weeks, Veronica was admitted to the hospital for round-the-clock monitoring. The doctors had insisted, citing the increasing risk of preterm labor and complications. The sterile environment felt stifling, but Veronica knew it was necessary. Every passing day was a victory, each week a milestone that brought her babies closer to viability. Dr. Harper entered her room one morning, her expression unusually tense. Veronica's stomach clenched. What is it? She asked, sitting up straighter despite the protest of her aching body. We've identified a potential issue, Dr. Harper said carefully. Baby 4's heart rate is fluctuating. It could be a sign of distress. Veronica's heart pounded in her chest. What does that mean? Can you do something? We're monitoring closely, Dr. Harper assured her. But if the situation worsens, we may have to deliver early. It's a balancing act, trying to give all the babies as much time as possible while addressing the needs of the ones in distress. The idea of delivering this early terrified Veronica. The odds of survival for such tiny infants were slim, even with the best medical care. But she also knew there were no easy choices in this situation. That night, Veronica lay awake, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She spoke softly, her words a mix of hope and desperation. You're strong, she whispered, as if the babies could hear her. All of you, just a little longer. Please. Hours later, her body betrayed her. A sharp pain tore through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She gasped, clutching at the sheets as panic surged through her. The nurses rushed in moments later, their faces grim but efficient as they worked to assess her condition. Dr. Harper appeared soon after, her presence a steadying force. Veronica, you're in preterm labor, she said, her voice calm but urgent. We're going to do everything we can to delay it, but you need to prepare yourself. This might be it. No, Veronica choked out, tears streaming down her face. They're not ready. Dr. Harper placed a hand on her shoulder. I know. but we'll fight for them, every single one. As the hours passed, the pain intensified, and Veronica clung to the hope that the medications would work. But deep down, she knew the inevitable was coming. Her body had reached its limit, and the fight was about to begin. The pain surged again, sharp and unrelenting, tearing through Veronica like a force she couldn't control. She gritted her teeth, gripping the sides of the hospital bed until her knuckles turned white. Around her, the room was a flurry of activity. Nurses adjusted monitors and administered medication, their faces calm but focused. Dr. Harper stood at the foot of the bed, her expression both determined and cautious. We're doing everything we can to hold off the labor, Dr. Harper said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. But the contractions are coming too frequently. Veronica, we may need to deliver soon. No, Veronica gasped, shaking her head. They're too small. They're not ready. Dr. Harper crouched beside her, her tone gentle but firm. I know this is terrifying, but your body can't handle much more. If we wait too long, we risk losing them. And you. We need to act. Tears blurred Veronica's vision. She had fought so hard to carry her babies this far, but now her body was betraying her. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her, as if every moment stretched into an eternity. Finally, she nodded, her voice breaking. Do whatever you have to do. Just save them. Dr. Harper squeezed her hand, a fleeting moment of reassurance before she turned to the medical team. Prep the OR. We're performing an emergency C-section. The next few minutes passed in a haze of hurried preparations. Veronica was wheeled down the brightly lit corridors, the sound of her heart monitor beeping in time with her rapid breaths. The operating room was cold, the stark white walls and gleaming instruments a sharp contrast to the warmth of her home. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to find a fragment of peace in the chaos. The medical team worked quickly, their movements synchronized as they prepared for the delicate procedure. Veronica felt the numbing effects of the anesthesia take hold, dulling the sharp edges of her fear but not erasing it completely. Dr. Harper leaned over her, her face partially obscured by a surgical mask. You're in good hands, Veronica, she said firmly. We'll bring them into the world safely. Veronica nodded weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. The procedure began, and though Veronica couldn't feel the pain, she was acutely aware of the tension in the room. The nurses and doctors communicated in clipped, efficient tones, their words a blur as they worked. Time seemed to stretch and warp, every second feeling like an hour. Then a sound broke through the silence, a tiny, fragile cry. Veronica's breath caught, her heart surging with a mix of relief and overwhelming emotion. One of her babies had made it. Baby one is out, Dr. Harper announced. A girl, she's breathing. Another cry followed, then another. Each one was like a beacon of hope, a reminder that her fight hadn't been in vain. Veronica counted them in her mind, clinging to the sound of their cries as if they were lifelines. By the time the final baby was delivered, the room was filled with the faint, fragile sounds of 8 tiny lives. Veronica's tears flowed freely now, her chest heaving with relief and gratitude. She wanted to see them, to hold them, but she knew they would need immediate care. The babies are being taken to the NICU, Dr. Harper said gently, her eyes soft with emotion. They're stable, but they'll need round-the-clock monitoring. Are they? Veronica's voice cracked. Are they going to be okay? Dr. Harper hesitated, her expression honest but kind. They're fighters, Veronica. It's going to be a long road, but they have a chance. A chance? It was more than Veronica had dared to hope for. She nodded, exhaustion overtaking her as the adrenaline began to fade. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Dr. Harper's reassuring smile, a flicker of light in the darkness. When Veronica woke, the room was quiet, the chaos of the operating room replaced by the stillness of recovery. Mrs. Danvers was seated beside her, her usually stern face softened by relief. You're awake, Mrs. Danvers said, her voice trembling slightly. The doctor said you're stable. The babies, Veronica whispered, her throat dry. They're in the NICU, Mrs. Danvers replied. Dr. Harper said they're holding on. It's a miracle, ma'am. A miracle. The word echoed in Veronica's mind as tears welled in her eyes. Despite the odds, her 8 tiny miracles had survived the first hurdle. She knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of gratitude. Julian's dream of a big chaotic family was alive, and she would fight for it with everything she had. The following day, Veronica insisted on being wheeled to the NICU despite the protests of the nurses. Her body ached, and every movement felt like a monumental effort, but she needed to see her babies. The sterile hallway seemed impossibly long, each turn bringing her closer to the cluster of incubators housing the fragile lives she had fought so hard to bring into the world. When she finally entered the NICU, the sight of the 8 incubators took her breath away. Each baby was impossibly small, their tiny chests rising and falling with delicate breaths. Tubes and monitors surrounded them, the beeping machines a stark reminder of their fragility. A nurse approached her, offering a warm smile. "They're fighters," the nurse said softly. "Each one has a unique strength." Veronica nodded, her eyes scanning the incubators. The labels read Baby 1 through Baby 8, but she already felt a deep connection to each of them. She leaned closer to the first incubator, where a tiny girl with dark hair, just like Julian's, slept peacefully. "Which one is struggling the most?" Veronica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's smile faltered, and her gaze shifted to one of the incubators at the far end. "Baby 4, she said carefully. "His lungs are underdeveloped. He's having trouble breathing on his own, even with the ventilator." Veronica felt her stomach drop. She moved toward Baby 4's incubator, her heart pounding as she saw the tiny boy inside. He was so small, his skin almost translucent, and every shallow breath seemed like a monumental effort. The monitor above him displayed erratic lines, a visual representation of the battle he was fighting. Dr. Harper entered the room, her expression a careful blend of professionalism and empathy. She greeted Veronica with a nod before glancing at Baby 4's monitor. "He's the most critical of the 8, Dr. Harper admitted, her tone measured. "We're doing everything we can, but his lungs are severely underdeveloped. The next 24 hours will be crucial." "What can I do?" Veronica asked, her voice trembling. She felt helpless, a sensation she had always despised. Dr. Harper placed a hand on her shoulder. "Right now, just being here is enough. Talk to him. Let him hear your voice. Sometimes that connection makes all the difference." Veronica nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She leaned closer to the incubator, resting her hand gently against the glass. "Baby 4, she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's your mother. You're so strong, my little fighter. I need you to keep fighting, okay? Your brothers and sisters need you. I need you." The hours passed in a blur as Veronica remained by Baby 4's side. The NICU staff worked tirelessly, adjusting his oxygen levels and monitoring his vital signs. Veronica watched every move, her heart breaking a little more each time his tiny body struggled to draw a breath. That night, Dr. Harper returned, her expression grave. Veronica braced herself, her hands gripping the sides of her wheelchair. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Harper crouched to meet her eyes. "Baby 4's condition is deteriorating. His lungs simply aren't developed enough to sustain him. We're running out of options." "No," Veronica said, shaking her head. "There has to be something else you can do. Some treatment, some intervention. Please." "We've tried everything," Dr. Harper said gently. "I'm so sorry, Veronica. He's fought so hard, but his little body is too fragile." The words hit her like a physical blow. Tears streamed down her face as she turned back to the incubator, her heart breaking for the son she couldn't save. She reached out, placing her hand against the glass again. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just once?" Dr. Harper nodded, her expression softening. "We'll prepare him for you." The nurses worked quickly and carefully, disconnecting the tubes and wires with practiced hands. They placed Baby 4 in Veronica's arms, wrapping him in a soft blanket. He was impossibly light, his tiny frame fitting perfectly against her chest. Veronica held him close, her tears falling freely now. "You're so loved," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You'll always be loved. Your brothers and sisters will know how brave you were, and I'll carry you in my heart forever." Baby Four's breathing grew slower, each shallow rise of his chest a painful reminder of how little time they had left. Veronica stayed with him, rocking him gently and whispering words of love and comfort until the end. When his tiny body finally stilled, Veronica felt a part of her heart shatter irreparably. The nurses moved quietly around her, their faces etched with sorrow as they gave her the space to grieve. Dr. Harper stayed nearby, a silent presence offering strength. In the days that followed, Veronica found herself grappling with the overwhelming loss. She spent hours in the NICU with her surviving 7 babies, pouring every ounce of love and strength she had into them. But baby Four's absence was a constant ache, a reminder of the fragility of life and the sacrifices she had made to bring them into the world. As she sat by baby one's incubator one evening, watching her tiny daughter sleep, Veronica whispered a promise to the child she had lost. "I'll honor you, my sweet boy. Every day, I'll fight for your brothers and sisters. For you." A few weeks later, the NICU remained a second home for Veronica. Her days were consumed by feedings, kangaroo care, and watching over the intricate maze of monitors and tubes that sustained her 7 surviving babies. Though the nurses and doctors had become an extension of her family, the loss of baby Four lingered in the air, a shadow that followed her wherever she went. The other babies were growing stronger, though each faced their own unique challenges. Baby One, the eldest and most vocal, had graduated from the ventilator to a CPAP machine and was slowly beginning to gain weight. Baby 8, the smallest, still struggled to regulate her temperature but had surprised the medical team with her tenacity. Veronica sat beside baby Five's incubator one morning, humming a lullaby softly as she watched him sleep. The sight of his tiny chest rising and falling steadily filled her with a fragile hope she hadn't dared to embrace before. She reached into the incubator, her hand encased in a sterile glove, and gently stroked his hand. His fingers, no bigger than grains of rice, twitched in response. "Good morning, my little fighter," she whispered. "You're doing so well. I'm so proud of you." Dr. Harper entered the NICU, her expression warm but professional. "Good morning, Veronica. How are we feeling today?" "Hopeful," Veronica admitted, her voice soft but steady. "They're fighters, every one of them." Dr. Harper nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. "They're defying the odds, Veronica, but I wanted to discuss something important with you." Veronica's stomach tightened. After weeks of living in a constant state of vigilance, she had learned to brace herself for every conversation with the medical team. "What is it?" Dr. Harper folded her hands in her lap, her expression serious but kind. "As the babies grow stronger, we'll start preparing for their transition home. It won't be all at once, and it won't be easy. They'll need continued care, some of them possibly for years. I want to make sure you're ready for what's ahead." The thought of bringing her babies home filled Veronica with equal parts joy and trepidation. The sterile environment of the NICU had become their sanctuary, a place where they were constantly monitored and cared for by experts. The idea of taking on that responsibility alone was daunting. "I've been preparing," Veronica said firmly. "The nursery is ready. I've hired neonatal nurses to help with their care. I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Harper's expression softened. "I don't doubt your dedication, but I also want you to remember that it's okay to lean on others. This journey will test you in ways you can't yet imagine." Veronica nodded, her resolve firm. She had already faced more than she thought possible. Losing Julian, losing baby Four, fighting for the lives of her surviving children. She had no choice but to be strong. For them, for herself, for the future she had promised them. A week later, the first milestone arrived. Baby One was discharged. Veronica's heart raced as she cradled her daughter in her arms, the weight of the moment almost overwhelming. The nurses gathered around, offering words of encouragement and carefully going over discharge instructions. "She's a strong one," one nurse said with a smile. "We'll miss her feisty little spirit here." Veronica laughed softly, her eyes misting with tears. "Thank you for everything." As she settled baby one into the car seat, her hands trembling slightly, Veronica felt the enormity of the moment. This was the first step in bringing her family together under one roof. She knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but it was a road she was willing to walk. The days blurred together as Veronica adjusted to life at home with baby one, while continuing her visits to the NICU for the others. The nursery, once a silent and empty space, was now filled with the soft coos and cries of her daughter. The sound was both a comfort and a reminder of the journey still ahead. 2 weeks later, baby 2 and baby 5 were ready to join their sister at home. Veronica felt her heart swell as she carried them through the front door, her staff and nurses helping to settle them into their cribs. The house, which had felt so vast and empty after Julian's death, was beginning to feel alive again. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Sleep was a luxury Veronica couldn't afford. Her nights filled with feedings, diaper changes, and moments of quiet reassurance as she checked on each baby. She often found herself sitting in the rocking chair in the middle of the night, one baby in her arms and another sleeping beside her, whispering promises to Julian that she would keep fighting. "I'll make sure they have everything they need," she murmured one night, her voice thick with emotion. "They'll know how much you loved them." As the weeks turned into months, the NICU emptied one by one, each baby coming home at their own pace. Baby 8 was the last to leave, her fragile start in life making her journey the longest. When Veronica finally brought her home, she felt a surge of triumph and relief that left her breathless. Standing in the nursery, surrounded by all 7 cribs, Veronica allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The past months had been the hardest of her life, filled with grief, fear, and moments of despair. But they had also been filled with love, a love so fierce it had carried her through every trial. Her gaze fell on an empty shelf in the nursery where she had placed a small framed photo of baby 4's ultrasound. She walked over and touched the frame gently, her heart aching with a bittersweet mix of loss and gratitude. "You'll always be with us," she whispered. "Your brothers and sisters will know your strength, and I'll make sure they grow up surrounded by love." As she turned back to the room, the sounds of her babies filled the air. Tiny cries, soft coos, the rustle of blankets. It was the chaos Julian had dreamed of, the family they had envisioned. And though the journey had only just begun, Veronica felt ready to face whatever came next. Years later, Veronica stood in the backyard of her sprawling estate, watching as her children raced across the perfectly manicured lawn. The sounds of their laughter filled the air, a joyful chaos that brought a warm smile to her face. 7 bright, energetic children, each with their unique personality, had grown into the kind of family she and Julian had once dreamed of. They were her everything, her miracle, her legacy. Her husband, Daniel, approached from behind, wrapping an arm around her waist. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his presence a steady reassurance that had anchored her through the past few years. Daniel wasn't Julian, and he never tried to be. He had walked into her life quietly, offering companionship and support when she least expected it. Over time, their bond had deepened, becoming something that felt as natural as breathing. "They're wild today," Daniel said with a chuckle, nodding toward the children. "Didn't we just tell them to keep the soccer ball away from the flower beds?" Veronica laughed softly. "We did, but you know how they are. Especially Alex. That boy's got too much energy for his own good." Alex, the most mischievous of the group, was baby 1, her eldest and boldest child. He was now 8 years old, his dark hair and stubborn streak a constant reminder of Julian. Beside him, Lila, baby 5, was trying to orchestrate a game, her natural leadership skills shining even amid the chaos. The others followed suit, their laughter and shouts blending into a beautiful symphony of life. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes warm. "How are you feeling? You've been quiet today?" Veronica sighed, leaning into his embrace. "Just thinking. It's hard to believe how far we've come. There were days I didn't think I'd make it, let alone see them grow like this." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through more than most people could imagine. But look at what you've built. This family. It's incredible." Veronica turned to face him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "I couldn't have done it without you. You stepped in when I was barely holding it together, and you never hesitated, even when things were overwhelming. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You don't give yourself enough credit. You're the strongest person I've ever met, but I'm glad I get to be part of this with you. Their moment was interrupted by a loud crash, followed by a chorus of groans. Veronica looked up to see that the soccer ball had indeed found its way into the flower beds, crushing several blossoms in its path. Alex stood frozen, his eyes wide with guilt, while Lila threw her hands up in exasperation. Alex Sterling, Veronica called out, her tone equal parts stern and amused. What did we say about the flower beds? Alex scratched the back of his head, grinning sheepishly. Sorry, Mom, it was an accident. Come on, Daniel said, taking her hand and pulling her toward the scene. Let's go play referee. As they approached the children, Veronica felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Life hadn't been easy. The loss of baby 4 still lingered in her heart, a quiet ache that would never fully disappear. She had worked tirelessly to support her children, navigating therapy sessions, medical appointments, and the unique challenges that came with raising 7 premature babies. But now, watching them grow and thrive, she knew every struggle had been worth it. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered around the outdoor dining table for dinner. The children chattered excitedly, recounting their day and playfully teasing one another. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching them with a contented smile, while Veronica served slices of cake for dessert. When the meal was finished, Alex stood up, holding a drawing he had made. Mom, Dad, he began, his voice shy but proud. I made this for you. He held up the paper, which showed a crayon drawing of their family. Veronica and Daniel stood in the center, surrounded by the children, each one labeled with their name. In the corner, there was a small angel, drawn with a soft halo and labeled simply, Baby 4. Veronica's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes as she took the drawing. Alex, she said, her voice trembling. It's beautiful. We didn't forget him, Alex said earnestly. Even though he's not here, he's still part of our family. Daniel placed a comforting hand on Veronica's shoulder as she hugged Alex tightly. Thank you, she whispered, her heart swelling with love and pride. That night, as she tucked each child into bed, Veronica lingered for a moment in the quiet nursery where Baby 4's photo still sat on the shelf. She ran her fingers over the frame, her heart filled with bittersweet gratitude. Your brothers and sisters remember you, she murmured softly, and so do I, every single day. When she returned to her bedroom, Daniel was waiting for her, his arms open. She climbed into bed beside him, resting her head on his chest as he wrapped her in his embrace. You okay? He asked, his voice low. Veronica nodded, her eyes closing as she let herself relax. More than okay. I'm grateful for all of it. As she drifted off to sleep, the sound of her children's laughter echoed in her mind, a reminder of the life she had fought for and the love that now surrounded her.